Morning light streamed through silk curtains at the Harrington estate, but even the sun could not chase away the chill in its marble halls. Alexander Harrington, 38 years old, and at the peak of his empire, adjusted his tie in front of a mirror. He was the picture of success: tall, dark blonde hair styled with precision, a tailored suit worth more than most cars, and cold blue eyes that revealed nothing of the warmth they once carried. Harrington Industries dominated real estate, finance, and technology, and his name was synonymous with ruthless triumph. But behind that flawless image stood a man imprisoned by mistrust. 5 years earlier, his closest friend and business partner, Richard Lane, had stolen millions and vanished. It was not just the loss of money that had broken Alexander, it was the betrayal of someone he had once called a brother. From that moment, he built walls higher than his skyscrapers and vowed never to let anyone close enough to wound him again. His secretary's voice came from the intercom announcing that the new candidate would arrive in an hour. Alexander sighed with the weariness of a man who no longer believed in people. 14 housekeepers had come and gone in 6 months, dismissed for theft or mistakes that he convinced himself were unforgivable, when in truth, it was his own inability to trust that pushed them away. Make sure she understands the rules this time. No exceptions, he instructed coldly. He walked through the vast estate, his steps echoing in silence. Every room was lavish, filled with priceless art and flawless decor, yet lifeless. The gourmet kitchen was rarely used, the living room untouched, his bedroom more a hotel suite than a home. Silence had become his only companion. His phone rang, and it was his lawyer, Charles Donovan, one of the few who still spoke honestly to him. Charles warned that firing housekeepers every 2 weeks could lead to lawsuits and told him maybe the problem was not them, but him. Alexander cut the call abruptly, though deep inside he knew Charles was right. His eyes drifted to the only photograph. On his desk, a younger Alexander smiling beside Richard Lane, and bitterness rose as he whispered that Richard had taught him never to trust anyone. The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of the new candidate. Alexander straightened his cuffs and prepared for another disappointment. When he opened the door, he was caught off guard. Standing there was Grace Miller, around 30, with golden brown hair tied loosely, wearing a simple navy dress and worn shoes. What struck him was not her modest appearance, but her smile, genuine and radiant. "Mr. Harrington, I'm Grace Miller. Sorry if I'm a few minutes late. My GPS thought it knew the city better than I did," she said warmly, extending her hand. Her handshake was firm and confident, unlike the timid ones he was used to. For the first time in years, Alexander hesitated. Something about this woman felt different. "Come in," he said evenly, already observing her closely. As they walked through the grand entrance, Grace looked around not with fear but with curiosity. She touched the railing of the staircase and smiled. "This is beautiful. I bet you've walked down these stairs at least once pretending to be in Gone with the Wind." The remark nearly made Alexander smile as it reminded him of his childhood, but he quickly forced his mask back into place. "Let's head to the office," he replied. Inside the imposing office, he sat behind his desk, a deliberate position of power. Grace sat opposite him, calm and composed. He scanned her resume and asked sharply, "Waitress at the Lakeside Diner for 3 years?" "Yes," she answered confidently. "I served coffee, remembered people's orders, and talked to everyone from executives to truck drivers. It taught me efficiency, attention to detail, and above all, respect." "And before that?" he pressed. "I worked at a laundromat, and before that I cared for my grandmother until she passed away." Her honesty surprised him. No excuses and no embellishments. "And what makes you think you're qualified to work in a house like this?" he asked sternly. Grace tilted her head thoughtfully. "Because a house isn't about expensive things. It's about care. I know how to make a place feel like home." Her words struck Alexander deeply. No one had ever called his estate anything but magnificent. Yet she had looked past the wealth and seen the emptiness. For the first time in years, something stirred within his frozen chest. The next morning, Alexander Harrington woke earlier than usual, restless with a plan forming in his mind. He had grown used to exposing dishonesty by setting traps, and he had no reason to believe Grace Miller would be any different. By 7 o'clock, sharp the doorbell rang. He watched her approach through the security cameras. She carried a small, thermal bag, her uniform neat and simple, and she stopped to admire the flowers in the garden before ringing again. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington," she said brightly as he opened the door. "I hope you slept well. I brought blueberry muffins. My daughter Emma helped me bake them so they might have fingerprints, but they taste wonderful." Alexander hesitated, taken aback. None of the other housekeepers had ever walked into his home bearing homemade food. He accepted the bag reluctantly, the scent of fresh muffins breaking through the sterile cold of the mansion. "That wasn't necessary," he muttered. "I know," she replied, her smile unwavering, "but I like to cook. And Emma insisted that any house needs what she calls Mommy's magical muffin touch to make it special." Reluctantly intrigued, he led her through the estate, explaining her responsibilities with his usual strictness. Grace listened carefully, asking practical questions about cleaning products and schedules, but her remarks surprised him. "This living room is beautiful," she observed as she dusted the edge of a chair, "but it feels like no one ever sits here. I think it would be perfect for reading a good book on a rainy afternoon." "I rarely have time to read for pleasure," Alexander replied. His tone clipped. "That's a shame," she said simply. "Reading is like traveling without leaving home. Emma just started reading, and seeing the world through her eyes feels magical." There was a warmth in her voice that stirred something unfamiliar in him, an echo of tenderness he thought he had buried long ago. After the tour, Alexander guided her to his office where his test awaited. On his desk lay 5 crisp $50 bills arranged casually, enough to tempt anyone struggling financially. His cameras would capture everything. "I'll be working for a while," he said. "Start in the living room." He sat back in his chair, closed his eyes, and slowed his breathing, feigning sleep. For several minutes he heard the distant hum of the vacuum, the careful movement of furniture. Then her footsteps approached. The office door creaked softly open. Grace's presence filled the room as she walked closer to the desk. Alexander's pulse quickened. He braced himself for the familiar sound of money being snatched away, but what he heard instead was unexpected. Grace whispered softly, almost as if speaking to a friend, "Mr. Harrington, money scattered like this attracts bad energy." Her voice was tender, almost affectionate. There was the sound of paper being shifted, but not hastily. It was deliberate, almost delicate. Then the sound faded. The door closed with the same quiet care it had opened. Alexander waited 5 minutes before opening his eyes. What he saw left him speechless. The money was still there, but it had been carefully arranged into the shape of a heart. In the center lay a small yellow note with neat handwriting that read, "Organized money attracts prosperity." Gee. He stared at it for a long time, unable to process the gesture. For years, every test had ended in theft or disappointment. Yet here was something different, something so unexpectedly kind that his chest tightened. He picked up the note, his fingers brushing over the letters, and a sound escaped him that he had not made in years. Laughter. It was not the polite laugh he offered business partners, but a genuine laugh from deep within, echoing through the silent office until his eyes watered. "What has this woman done to me?" he whispered. Through the window he saw Grace in the living room, humming to herself as she arranged cushions on the sofa, completely unaware of the earthquake she had caused in her employer's heart. For the first time in years, Alexander wondered if perhaps there were still people in the world worthy of trust. And if Grace Miller was one of them, then his carefully ordered life was about to change in ways he could not imagine. A week passed after the heart-shaped money incident, and Alexander Harrington barely recognized his own home. Grace Miller had brought with her a warmth that spread into every corner of the mansion, a quiet magic that money could never buy. It began on the second day when Alexander went to make his morning coffee. On the Italian espresso machine, a small note was stuck with cheerful handwriting. "Good morning, Mr. Fancy Coffee. I hope today treats you kindly. G." He found himself smiling before he realized it. On the third day, he discovered the household robot vacuum had toy eyes glued to its surface with a small sign that read, Sir Cleanington, Knight of Royal Cleaning. When he raised an eyebrow, Grace simply laughed. He works harder than all of us. He deserves recognition. Alexander shook his head, insisting that it was only a machine. Not anymore, she replied with an affectionate pat. Now he has personality. By the fourth day, the refrigerator was no longer the cold steel monument it had always been. Grace had covered it with colorful magnets holding drawings made by her daughter Emma, along with small handwritten notes. One read, "You're amazing, even on Mondays." Another drawing depicted a tall stick figure with dark hair, a big smile, and the words, "Thank you for giving my mommy a chance." Alexander stood staring at it far longer than he admitted, touched in a way he could not explain. The fifth day he walked into the kitchen to find chaos. Flour dusted the counters, eggshells lay scattered, and Grace stood at the stove with a smudge of flour on her nose, struggling to flip a pancake that looked more like burnt dough. "I thought I'd make breakfast," she said with a sheepish grin. Apparently pancakes are harder than I imagined. Normally Alexander would have dismissed a housekeeper instantly for such disorder. Instead, he surprised himself by stepping beside her. "You're using the heat too high. Watch for bubbles before flipping." Grace handed him the spatula eagerly. "Show me. I'll be your student." Their hands brushed as he guided hers across the pan, sending an unexpected jolt through him. She bit her lip in concentration, and Alexander found himself watching her instead of the food. By the sixth day, music floated through the halls. Not the classical or jazz records Alexander kept, but cheerful contemporary songs that made the air feel lighter. He followed the sound to the living room where Grace was dusting while singing into the handle of a broom. She froze when she saw him. "I clean better with music. I can wear headphones if you prefer." He surprised her with his reply. "Leave it. The house feels alive for the first time." On the seventh day, Grace introduced Emma. The little girl, 6 years old with messy braids and a yellow dress, spun, in wonder at the size of the entrance hall. "Mommy, he lives in a princess castle," she exclaimed before Grace hushed her. Alexander approached gently. "You must be Emma." She looked up at him with bright, curious eyes. "Mommy says you're very smart, but maybe you forgot how to use your heart. Don't worry, she's here to remind you." Alexander felt something warm spread through his chest at the child's simple words. That evening, when Grace and Emma left the mansion, he realized that for the first time in years, he did not dread the weekend for loneliness. Instead, he dreaded it because it meant the house would fall quiet without them. Something inside him was changing, and no business empire could compare to the feeling of life returning to his home. It was the beginning of Grace Miller's second week in the Harrington estate, when something unexpected disrupted Alexander's routine. He was in the middle of a video conference with Japanese investors when the doorbell rang insistently. Annoyed, he asked his secretary Margaret to check, but instead, Grace's anxious voice called out from the hallway. "Mr. Harrington, I need to speak with you. It's urgent." Alexander excused himself from the meeting and found Grace holding her daughter Emma by the hand. The child's cheeks were wet from tears, her school uniform wrinkled, and she clutched her backpack tightly. Grace explained quickly, her voice trembling. "Miss Rose, our babysitter, had to rush to the hospital. Her sister was in an accident. I have no one else to watch Emma. I know this isn't part of our agreement, but please, could she stay here today? She'll be quiet. I promise she won't cause trouble." Alexander looked at Emma. Her eyes were wide, a mix of fear and hope. She spoke in a small voice. "I promise to be good, Mr. Harrington. Mommy said you're kind even when you pretend to be serious." Something inside him softened immediately. "Of course she can stay," he said firmly. Relief washed over Grace's face. "Thank you. Truly, thank you." She kissed Emma's forehead before returning to her tasks, leaving Alexander standing awkwardly in the hall with a 6-year-old who looked at him as though he were some kind of giant. "Well, he said, trying to sound casual. Are you hungry? Emma nodded. A little. Mommy packed a sandwich, but I couldn't eat. I was too worried about Miss Rose. Minutes later, they were in the kitchen, Alexander preparing a snack while Emma perched on the counter, legs swinging. She chattered freely about school, her teacher, and how Miss Rose baked cookies that tasted like hugs. Between bites of apple, she asked innocently, Mr. Harrington, why is your house so quiet? At our place, there's always music, or mommy singing, or me talking to my stuffed animals. He hesitated. I work a lot. Silence helps me concentrate. But what about when you're not working? Don't you get lonely? Her words struck him deeper than any boardroom confrontation. For a moment, he surprised himself with honesty. Sometimes. Then you need more hugs, she declared with the certainty only a child could have. Mommy says hugs heal sad hearts. Before he could respond, Emma wandered into the living room, curious about everything. Alexander followed just in time to see her bump a table, sending a baccarat crystal vase crashing to the marble floor. The shattering echoed like thunder. Emma froze, staring at the pieces, then burst into quiet tears. I broke it. Mommy's going to be so mad. You'll fire her and we won't have money for food. Alexander knelt beside her, ignoring the shards. Emma, look at me. She raised her teary eyes, expecting anger. Instead, his voice was calm and gentle. You're not in trouble. It was an accident. And your mother will not lose her job because of a vase. Things can be replaced, people cannot. Her sobs slowed as she whispered, but it looked so expensive. It was only glass, he said softly. And you are far more valuable than that. Together they gathered the larger fragments. Emma studied them carefully and began arranging the pieces in a bowl she found, creating a small mosaic. The fractured glass caught the light beautifully. See? She said proudly. It's not the same as before, but it's still beautiful. It got back up again. Alexander stared at her creation, imperfect yet full of heart, and realized she was right. It was more meaningful than the original. When Grace returned to collect her daughter, she found them on the floor piecing together a forgotten puzzle. Emma chattered about how Mr. Harrington had helped her, while Alexander listened intently, as though her every word was precious. That night, after the mansion grew quiet again, Alexander reflected on the lesson the little girl had given him. For years he had treated broken things and broken trust as permanent losses, yet in the hands of a child even shattered glass could become something beautiful again. 2 weeks after Emma's visit, the Harrington mansion had settled into a new rhythm. For the first time in years, Alexander found himself looking forward to mornings, curious about what small surprise Grace Miller might bring. But everything shifted one Thursday when she didn't arrive on time. By 7:15, he was pacing his office. By 7:30, genuine worry filled him. Grace was never late. At 8 o'clock, the phone finally rang. Her voice was hoarse and weak. Mr. Harrington, I'm so sorry. Emma and I caught the flu. She was up all night with a fever and I can barely stand. I can't come in today. Alexander's reply was immediate. Of course not. Take care of yourself and your daughter. Don't worry about work. But I never miss a day. I know you had an important meeting today. Grace, he cut in, his tone softer than he intended. Your health and Emma's are more important than any meeting. There was a pause, and he thought he heard her try to hide a quiet sob. Thank you, Mr. Harrington, we'll manage. But Alexander couldn't concentrate the rest of the morning. He pictured Emma with flushed cheeks, Grace struggling to care for her while barely able to stand. By noon, he did something completely out of character. He canceled every meeting, told Margaret to reschedule, and left the office. 40 minutes later, he stood outside a modest apartment building on the poorer side of town, carrying heavy grocery bags. He had stopped for medicine, soup, tea, juice, and even a small teddy bear. When Grace opened the door, wrapped in a worn robe with disheveled hair and tired red eyes, she froze in disbelief. Mr. Harrington, what are you doing here? I brought some things, he said simply, lifting the bags. May I come in? The apartment was small but tidy. decorated with second-hand furniture lovingly cared for. Emma's drawings covered the walls. Photos of mother and daughter smiling at each other brightened the space. It was humble, yet warmer than his entire estate. "She's asleep," Grace whispered, guiding him to the table where he unpacked the bags. Her fever broke a little. "She's weak but resting." Her voice trembled as she watched him line up medicine, crackers, and juice. "You didn't have to do this. It must have cost—" "Don't worry about the cost," Alexander interrupted. He placed the teddy bear on the table. "I thought Emma might like a new friend." Tears filled Grace's eyes. "No one has ever cared for us like this." He stepped closer, touched her shoulder gently, and said, "It's what friends do." The word hung between them, carrying a weight that neither of them dared name. From the bedroom came a small, tired voice. "Mommy, who are you talking to?" Grace smiled softly. "It's Mr. Harrington, sweetheart. He came to see us." Emma appeared in the doorway wearing unicorn pajamas, clutching her blanket. Her face was pale, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. "You came. Mommy said you're too busy to visit regular people." Alexander knelt to her height. "Well, it turns out you two are the most important people I know, and important people deserve visits when they're sick." Emma's face brightened. "Does that mean we're important to you?" "Very important," he said with a sincerity that surprised even himself. Emma beamed. "Then will you stay for dinner? Mommy makes the best mac and cheese when we're sick." Grace stammered an apology, embarrassed, but Alexander interrupted again. "Actually, how about I cook tonight? You two need to rest." And so Alexander Harrington, Billionaire CEO, spent the evening in a cramped kitchen making soup from a can and toast while Emma sat on the counter as his cheerful assistant, and Grace watched from the couch with a smile that warmed the room more than any fireplace. At dinner, Emma giggled between spoonfuls. "You're different here, Mr. Harrington. Happier. Your eyes smile too." Alexander met Grace's gaze across the small table and saw tears shining there. "She's right," he admitted softly. "I am happier here." Later, after Emma fell asleep, Grace walked him to the door. "Thank you. You didn't have to—" "I wanted to," he said, his voice steady. "You and Emma make me want to be better." Driving back to his empty mansion, Alexander realized that for the first time in 5 years he no longer felt alone. He had discovered something he didn't even know he was searching for: a family. 3 weeks after the night Alexander Harrington cooked dinner in Grace Miller's apartment, life inside the mansion had taken on a rhythm he had never thought possible. He looked forward to weekends spent playing in the garden with Emma, dinners that Grace transformed into warm gatherings, and quiet evenings where laughter filled the once-empty halls. On a bright Saturday, they spread a picnic blanket on the mansion's lawn. Alexander helped Emma fly a colorful kite while Grace arranged sandwiches and fruit on the blanket. The child's laughter echoed as the kite soared into the sky. "Look, Mommy, Mr. Harrington taught the kite to dance," she shouted before running into his arms. He lifted her easily, spinning her around, her joy contagious. Grace watched, them with a smile so tender that Alexander's chest tightened. For a fleeting moment it felt like perfection, a glimpse of the life he had unknowingly been searching for. But across the street, hidden among the trees, a camera lens captured the scene. By Monday morning the storm had begun. Alexander was finishing his coffee when his secretary Margaret called, panic in her voice. "You need to see the news immediately." He turned on the television and his blood ran cold. On the screen were photos of him with Grace and Emma from the picnic, intimate images splashed with sensational headlines. Billionaire Alexander Harrington in secret romance with housekeeper. Mystery child's father unknown. The news anchor smiled slyly as she repeated rumors. Sources say the Harrington family is concerned about this relationship. Within minutes, his phone filled with calls, board members, investors, family. He ignored them all until one came from his sister Caroline. Her voice was sharp. "Alexander, what are you doing? You're embarrassing the family. A housekeeper with a child? Do you realize what this looks like? You don't understand." He tried to explain, but she cut him off. I understand perfectly. This is a mistake, and you're destroying everything our family built. The line went dead. The worst call came from Grace herself. Her voice broke with tears. I saw the news. I'm so sorry. I'll resign immediately. Emma and I will leave the city. I don't want to cause you more damage. Grace? No. Alexander said fiercely, louder than he intended. Don't do anything. I'll fix this. How? They're calling me a gold digger. They're calling Emma a problem. How can you fix this? His chest ached at the pain in her voice. Trust me, he begged. Please, just trust me. That afternoon, Alexander did what no advisor recommended. He called a press conference. The board warned him to stay silent. Margaret pleaded with him to reconsider, but he refused. When he entered the Carter Enterprises conference hall, cameras flashed and reporters filled the room. He walked to the podium, posture unshakable, and began. You have published photos of me with Grace Miller and her daughter Emma. Let me clarify. The room fell silent. Grace Miller is not just my housekeeper. She is one of the most honest, hard-working, and decent people I have ever met. In a world full of masks, she is authentic. That is rare. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but he continued firmly. Her daughter Emma is extraordinary, bright, kind, and full of joy. Any attempt to insult her is not only false but despicable. A reporter raised a hand. Mr. Harrington, are you confirming a romantic relationship with your housekeeper? The room held its breath. Alexander could have denied it. He could have salvaged his reputation. But instead he thought of Grace's laughter in the kitchen, Emma's small arms wrapped around his neck, the warmth he felt whenever he came home. He spoke with absolute clarity. I am confirming that Grace and Emma have changed my life. I am confirming that I trust them more than anyone I have ever known. And I am confirming that they are my choice. Chaos erupted, questions shouted, flashes exploding, but Alexander raised his hand for silence. Speculate about me all you want, analyze every photo, doubt every word, but I will not allow the reputation of two innocent people to be destroyed. My greatest legacy is not the companies I built or the wealth I hold. My legacy is the family I choose to love and protect, and that family is Grace and Emma Miller. With that, he walked away from the podium, ignoring the storm behind him. For the first time in years, Alexander Harrington felt free. 3 weeks after the press conference, the frenzy of headlines had calmed. The media had shifted to new scandals, but Alexander Harrington's bold words still echoed. Invitations began arriving from magazines wanting to tell his story, charity events eager to include him, and for the first time in years, calls came from people interested in his happiness rather than just his wealth. One afternoon, Margaret entered his office holding an elegant cream envelope. An invitation for you, sir, the Children's Hope Foundation Charity Ball. They would like you to be the keynote speaker this year. Alexander studied the golden lettering. I usually just make a donation and avoid these events. They specifically requested you, Margaret explained, to speak about family and community. Just then, Grace walked in carrying a tray of coffee. She had grown more reserved since the press conference, unsure how to act now that the world knew her importance in his life. Alexander looked at her suddenly and said, Grace, how would you feel about attending the event with me as my guest? The tray nearly slipped from her hands. What? A charity ball? Alexander, I don't know how to dance, I don't own a proper dress, and I'm not used to speaking with senators and executives. You talk to me every day, he said with quiet warmth, and I am supposedly important. That's different. With you, I can be myself. At an event like that, they'll judge me, they'll say I don't belong. Alexander stepped closer, his voice steady. You don't need to belong to their world. You've built something better, our world, and I want to show them how beautiful it is. That evening, he took her to an exclusive boutique downtown. Madame Dubois, the elegant French seamstress, studied Grace carefully. Natural elegance, nothing too flashy. Let her shine as herself. After trying 2 dresses, Grace stepped out in a navy gown that hugged her figure subtly and brought a glow to her eyes. Alexander's breath caught. He whispered, "Perfect." The night of the ball arrived. Grace descended the staircase of the mansion where Emma had been left in the care of a babysitter. Her hair was swept into a graceful bun, pearl earrings glistened at her ears, and the navy gown made her look radiant beyond words. Alexander offered his arm, his voice hushed but sure. "You look stunning." The ballroom of the Grand Imperial Hotel glittered with chandeliers and polished marble. As they entered, all eyes turned toward them. Grace clung to his arm nervously. "Everyone is staring." "Because you are the most beautiful woman here," Alexander replied without hesitation. At first she seemed overwhelmed, but soon her natural warmth emerged. When a senator's wife admired her jewelry, Grace smiled and said, "Thank you, though I warned Alexander if he bought anything too expensive, Emma and I would use it to play princesses." The woman laughed with genuine delight. When a bank executive made a condescending remark about humble backgrounds, Grace answered with grace, "Yes, I come from simple beginnings, but humility is a luxury many wealthy people can't afford." The table chuckled, charmed by her candor. During dinner, Alexander was called to the podium. He had a carefully written speech in his pocket. But when he looked at Grace smiling at him from the front table, he forgot it entirely. "Tonight I was asked to speak about philanthropy," he began. "But what I really want to speak about is family." The audience quieted instantly. A year ago, I thought family was about lineage, legacy, and reputation. But I have learned that family is about the people who inspire you to be better, the ones who see goodness in you when you've forgotten it yourself. True wealth is not in numbers on a balance sheet, but in the laughter of a child who reminds you that hugs can heal a sad heart. True wealth is in the smile of a woman who turns a house into a home simply by walking through its doors. The silence was profound, many guests visibly moved. So tonight my donation is not just to this foundation's cause, it is a thank you for teaching me that the most beautiful families are not always the ones we are born into, but the ones we choose to build. The applause thundered through the hall, yet Alexander only looked at Grace, who had tears streaming down her cheeks. Later, in the garden outside the ballroom, under strings of lights and a sky full of stars, they walked slowly together. At the fountain, Grace stopped. "Alexander, what do you really want from me? From us?" He took her hands, feeling how small and warm they were. "5 years ago, I built walls to protect my heart. But you and Emma didn't climb those walls. You knocked them down with kindness. I don't want you to be just my housekeeper. I want you and Emma in my life forever as family." Grace's tears shimmered as she smiled through them. "Are you sure?" "Emma is outspoken. I burn toast. I'm not polished like the people in your world." Alexander laughed softly and pulled her close. "You are perfect exactly as you are. And Emma is perfect exactly as she is. I love you both more than I thought possible." Under the lights and the stars, Alexander Harrington kissed Grace Miller for the first time, knowing that in her arms and in Emma's smile, he had found the home he had been searching for all along. Months passed after the charity ball, and life at the Harrington estate transformed completely. Where silence had once reigned, there was now music, laughter, and the sound of Emma's little feet running through the halls. Alexander Harrington came home not to emptiness, but to warmth. Grace Miller filled the mansion with life, and Emma made every corner brighter. On weekends, they shared small traditions: breakfast together at the kitchen table, games in the garden, or movies in the evening, where Emma would inevitably fall asleep on Alexander's lap. He found himself treasuring the smallest things: Grace humming while folding laundry, Emma's drawings taped proudly on the refrigerator, even the messes in the kitchen after baking. The mansion no longer felt like a museum. It finally felt like a home. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing that Emma had insisted every family needed for serious talks, Alexander looked at Grace with unusual intensity. "Grace, there's something I need to say." She tilted her head curiously, the fading sunlight casting a glow over her face. "What is it?" "I spent years believing that success was measured by power and money. But since you and Emma came into my life, I've realized success means something else entirely. It means family, love, and the courage to trust again. I don't want you to be my housekeeper any longer. I want you to be part of my life in every way." Grace blinked, her eyes shining with emotion. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Alexander took her hands in his. "Yes. I want us to be a family. I want Emma to have a father. And I want you to be my wife." Tears streamed down Grace's face as she smiled through them. "Alexander, are you certain? Marriage, family, all of it?" "I have never been more certain," he said firmly. "You and Emma are my heart, my home, and my future." At that moment, Emma came running out with a drawing in her hand. "Look, Mommy, look, Mr. Harrington." She showed them a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. Above it she had written, "My family." Grace's tears fell freely as she pulled Emma close. Alexander reached for them both, wrapping them into an embrace. That felt like the truest vow he could ever make. From that day forward, the mansion was no longer Alexander Harrington's fortress. It was a home alive with love, a place where family dinners mattered more than board meetings and where bedtime stories and pancake breakfasts carried more weight than any contract he could ever sign. Alexander had found the family he thought he would never deserve, and he vowed never to let it go. A year after Alexander Harrington asked Grace Miller to marry him, the mansion was no longer cold or silent. Every corner reflected the family they had built together. Photos of trips decorated the walls. Emma's drawings were framed proudly, and plants that Grace insisted gave the house its soul filled the rooms with warmth. On a spring morning, Alexander woke not to an alarm, but to giggles in the hallway. Emma, now 8 years old, was whispering too loudly as she tried to surprise him with breakfast. She pushed open the door carrying a tray that was clearly too heavy for her. Determination shining in her eyes. "Surprise, Daddy Alexander, breakfast in bed." He sat up, smiling as she set the tray on his lap. Scrambled eggs, toast, and juice, all made with the seriousness of a child wanting everything perfect. Grace appeared in the doorway, her hair loose and her floral dress glowing in the morning light. She laughed softly. She insisted today was special breakfast day. Emma climbed onto the bed proudly. "I made the eggs myself. Mommy just helped a little." "They're perfect," Alexander said, tasting them with exaggerated delight. Emma beamed. As they ate together, Emma suddenly grew serious. "Daddy Alexander, at school everyone has brothers or sisters. I was thinking maybe it would be nice if I had one too." The room fell quiet. Alexander looked at Grace, who blushed faintly but smiled. He turned back to Emma gently. "And what do you think, Mommy?" Grace's voice was tender. "I think our family is already perfect, but maybe it could become even more perfect." Emma's face lit up. "Does that mean yes? Can we try? Can I choose the name?" Alexander laughed and pulled both of them close. "It means we'll talk about it together as a family." Later that morning, they turned the kitchen into a cheerful mess, beginning what Emma called Operation Butterfly, pancakes. Alexander wore an apron that said Chef of the Heart, a Father's Day gift Emma had proudly given him. Together, they tried shaping pancake batter into butterflies, while Emma added drops of colorful food dye. Some turned out lopsided, others looked more like dinosaurs, but the laughter that filled the kitchen was priceless. When one of the pancakes collapsed, Emma giggled. "That looks like a flying dinosaur." Alexander pretended to be serious. "It's a rare butterfly dinosaur, extinct for millions of years." Grace laughed as flour dusted the counter. Emma's giggles echoed through the kitchen, and Alexander realized there was nothing in the world he would trade for this moment. That afternoon, Alexander stood at a podium before an audience of executives. His speech was prepared, but as always, since Grace and Emma entered his life, he spoke from the heart. 2 years ago, I measured success by numbers on a balance sheet. Today, I measure it by the number of times my daughter laughs at breakfast. I learned that true leadership begins at home. Family is not defined by bloodlines, but by love and the courage to let people into your heart. Behind him on the screen appeared a photo of the 3 of them, covered in paint after Emma had decided the garden fence needed a creative redesign. The audience laughed warmly and Alexander smiled, knowing this story was no longer about business at all. That evening he returned to the mansion, where Grace sat on the couch with Emma curled asleep in her lap. The television played softly, the scent of cookies drifted from the kitchen, and a new drawing was taped to the refrigerator. 3 stick figures smiled together under the words, "My perfect family." As Alexander kissed Grace's forehead and pulled her closer, he whispered, "I once thought I was building an empire, but this right here is my true kingdom." 2 years after the wedding, Alexander Harrington woke to the sound of Emma humming in the kitchen. She was now 9, determined to surprise her parents with breakfast. He smiled as he listened to her, whispering instructions to herself, the soft clatter of dishes filling the air. Grace's gentle voice followed, calm and reassuring. Their voices together were better than any symphony he had ever heard. Moments later, Emma burst into the bedroom, balancing a tray piled with toast, fruit, and juice. "Surprise, Daddy Alexander." "Mommy helped, but I made the eggs myself." He pulled her into his arms, kissing her hair. "It's the best breakfast I've ever had." Grace appeared in the doorway, her hair falling freely around her shoulders, wearing a soft silk robe. Even after years together, the sight of her still took his breath away. They ate together as Emma chattered excitedly about school. Then, with sudden seriousness, she said, "Daddy Alexander, I think our family should get bigger. I want a little brother or sister, someone I can teach things to, someone to play with when you and Mommy are busy." Alexander looked at Grace. She blushed, her eyes shining. "Our family's already perfect," she said softly, "but maybe it could be even more perfect." Emma clapped her hands, thrilled. "So it's a yes? Can I pick the name?" Alexander laughed and gathered them both close. "We'll take it. One step at a time. Families make decisions together." Later that day, Emma ran outside to play, leaving Alexander and Grace on the porch swing that had become their favorite place for honest talks. Grace leaned against his chest, her voice thoughtful. "Do you realize how far you've come, Alexander? 3 years ago you couldn't trust anyone, and now you're ready to bring another child into our lives." He kissed the top of her head. "I used to believe love was weakness and family was obligation. Now I know they're the only things that truly matter." Inside the house, every detail told the story of the family they had built. Emma's drawings framed on the walls, photographs of vacations and birthdays, even the small mosaic Emma had made from the broken vase still glowing with captured light. That night, as they tucked Emma into bed, she whispered drowsily, "Promise me we'll always stay like this." Alexander smiled, brushing her hair back. "I promise, little one. Families like ours only grow stronger." Later, lying beside Grace, he whispered, "What would you say if I told you I want to give Emma the brother or sister she's dreaming of?" Grace looked into his eyes, her smile tender. "I'd say Alexander Harrington continues to surprise me every day. And yes, let's try, but without rushing. We have love. We have time. And we have Emma to remind us that family isn't about numbers. It's about hearts connected forever." He kissed her deeply, holding her close, and realized his once frozen heart now overflowed with warmth. As spring bloomed in the garden outside, Alexander finally understood his true legacy. Not skyscrapers, not companies, not an empire built on fear, but the family he had chosen to love, the laughter of a child who called him daddy, and the woman whose smile turned every cold wall into a home. And in that truth, he found peace, knowing that his story of redemption was only the beginning of a life where love would always win.